Good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday, and welcome to Liz Live Thursday. I was supposed to do it last night. I usually do Wednesday nights, and I pulled my shoulder, my neck. I don't know what happened, but I was in so much pain I could not do the show last night. So I'm sorry about that. Hello, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone on Facebook and Instagram. I'm so happy to see everybody tonight. And tonight is just a good old-fashioned relationship topic show. Boundaries. Before I went to grad school, I didn't even know what a boundary was. And the more I talk to some of my newer clients, the more that I'm realizing that, I take this word for granted. We take this word for granted. And a lot of people don't know what boundaries are. And we can never get too much boundary training. So I went through like years of it in graduate school. So I'm going to talk about boundaries tonight. Boundaries generally apply to relationships. Sorry, Instagram, the microphone's covering my face. Generally, they apply to relationships, but they can also apply to self. And they can really apply to any situation in your life where you need to sort of advocate for yourself, stand up for yourself. And I still work on this. I still struggle with this. And I am a professional therapist for, 13 years now. So when I'm talking about boundaries, remember, it's not necessarily a place that you're going to arrive where one day you're going to have all your boundaries clear. Your life's going to be perfectly organized and, that's it. It doesn't work like that. Boundaries are something that we learn, and each situation that we come up against in life gives us a new challenge and kind of a new opportunity to set a boundary or maybe to take a boundary down. So I'm going to talk about relationship boundaries, and I'm going to start like from the very beginning, like 101, good brush up on boundaries for anyone who's maybe new and watching. Hello, Brett. I see you're new to the Liz Live show. Wonderful to see you. And if you're new to the Liz Live show on Instagram, I think someone's new there too. Hello to you. This might be something new, or it might be something that you know about, but you just want to brush up on a little bit. Okay, so when I'm talking about boundaries, and I'm talking about in terms of counseling, psychology, what is a boundary? Okay, so usually the way that I teach boundaries to my clients is I hold up a map of the United States, which I don't happen to have around, but we all know what a map looks like. Okay, and it could be a map of the United States, a map of whatever country you want, doesn't matter. So if I hold up an imaginary map to you, what's the first thing that you see on a map? Okay, and usually most people get this right. The first thing that you'll notice on a map is the boundaries, the state lines. So we understand, for example, the United States as a territory because we see the boundary lines around the country, and within the country we see all the state lines. And there's sort of an understanding that when if we live in Pennsylvania, for example, which I used to live there, that the rules in Pennsylvania are not the same rules as in the state of Florida where I live now. So for example, in Florida there's no state emissions and inspection for cars. Pennsylvania there is. So when I moved from Florida to Pennsylvania, I didn't still follow Florida rules because I understood that every state in the United States, every state in the country, every territory within the country has their own rules, has their own government, et cetera, et cetera. And then the country is sort of like, the family, if you will, or your system of people. So we know that there's a big system of people or big group of people that are in your life, but within that big group of people, there are individual people with individual relationships, with individual rules and boundaries for themselves. And we have to learn over time how to understand those boundaries between our relationships, very much in the same way as we have to understand lines of state lines and territories within, land. So it's not really that different. So boundaries are where something begins and something ends. And it's no different when we're talking about countries and states as when we're talking about human beings, people, and families and relationships and friend groups and maybe coworkers where you work. Whenever you have a group of people, you need boundaries and you have multiple relationships going on at one time. And we are all, every single one of us watching this today or next month or whenever you happen to find this video, we are all in relationships. And not only are we all in relationships, but we also have a relationship with the self. So there's my relationship I have with myself, with Elizabeth, and then there's the relationships that I have with everybody that I'm close to. And there will be boundaries that I will need to think about with new relationships, new situations, and of course with my clients. And I might have different boundaries with my clients, different professional boundaries than I'm going to have in my personal relationships. So as you can see, we are all constantly and simultaneously in multiple relationships at any given time, and each relationship and each occurrence within that relationship or within life that may come our way, come into our path, will require perhaps a different boundary or a different set of boundaries. And conversely, I think we all also know people who are very rigid and they have no flexibility in their boundaries. And those are people that, sometimes we call them like a stick in the mud or, too stiff or too, we might say they're too boundaried or, they're cold or they're tough because they might have boundaries that are a little too rigid. And when people have boundaries that are too rigid, it's very hard to get close to them. So we have to, understand that setting boundaries doesn't mean that those boundaries are set in stone forever. They may ebb and flow. They may get really tough under certain circumstances, loosen up in others. But we all know people that have absolutely no boundaries. And when there's no boundaries, you're bound to have complete chaos in your life. And if you have too many boundaries and you're too rigid, you're going to be, really sort of lacking closeness and sort of putting people off or pushing them away. So I think that the ideal situation for boundaries is to have, like anything else in life, is to have a good balance in your life of boundaries and to remember that we're always going to be moving and changing our boundaries as life continues on, depending on what's going on, what relationships we have, what place we are in our lives. And, that homeostasis or that balance that we're always looking for is very, very difficult to achieve. But it can be done. Probably not maintained for long, but it can be done. So why are boundaries? Okay, so we sort of have this idea of what boundaries are. So I want to give some examples of boundaries so that people understand, what I'm talking about. If you're still like, okay, what is she talking about? State lines, boundaries, relationships, what does all this mean? So when it comes to personal relationships, the way that I like to think about boundaries is a way of communicating to others what you will and will not put up with, or what you are or are not comfortable with, or what you will and will not do. And we all struggle with boundaries, I think, generally. And the nicer you are of a person, usually the harder it is for you to set boundaries. So when you're telling somebody, yes, I will do this, or no, I won't do that, or hey, I don't like what you're doing or saying, and keep that away from me, or I'm not getting involved in that. Those are boundaries. Or telling somebody, something that you're not comfortable with, that you don't like, or when somebody is maybe pushing you a little bit too far or making you feel uncomfortable or pushed in a way that is uncomfortable for you. So the way that we sort of can remedy that is, again, by setting boundaries. But setting boundaries is so difficult for many people, and I notice especially women have struggle with boundaries, because boundaries often require us saying no or setting limits with people that we love. And when we say no, or we set limits with people that we love, or limits for ourselves with the people that we love, we feel very much like we're disappointing them. You know, we're disappointing them, we're letting them down, we're not being a good enough friend, mother, sister, brother, cousin, whatever the relationship is. And we start to feel this guilt and this regret that, oh, you know, I said no to this person, or I refused to do what this person asked me, or I told this person that I felt very uncomfortable with what they were asking me or what they were saying to me, and oh my God, did I upset them? Did I make them mad at me? Are they upset with me? And this is the general feeling of fear that comes along when we're starting to think about boundaries and put up boundaries. So I know that when people are learning to set boundaries, it's very scary. Again, because not only of all the things I just mentioned, but also because when we're thinking about setting boundaries, we also fear that, hey, if I really advocate for myself and I really stand up for myself, might I lose this relationship forever? So all of these fears of, did I hurt someone's feelings? Did I let someone down? Am I going to be disappointing them? Are they going to be mad at me? Or are they going to walk away from me? Or are they going to say bad things about me? Or are they going to, spread bad words about me in the community or something if I erect these boundaries? And this, my friends, is what I find in my practice are the most common reasons that people really struggle with putting up boundaries. And if we look a little bit deeper beyond that, beyond all those fears, what really is underneath it all is our self-confidence and our self-acceptance and our valuing our own feelings and our own self on the same playing field as we do other people. And let me tell you, I'm 45 and I'm just figuring this out, okay? This is tough stuff I'm talking about. And people will come to me for therapy for years, just, sort of working on this boundary issue, because the boundaries that we set or the boundaries that we don't set are a direct reflection of how confident or how we are, or how much we value ourselves. And of course, there could be many things mixed into that, like our history, maybe trauma, just not being grounded in our own boots, in a way that, we really understand and feel and know who we are and what we stand for. So it takes a long time to really, I think, evolve and grow into the place where setting boundaries is easy. So I don't think setting boundaries is easy at all. And anyone who tells you that it is easy, they're not being truthful for you, or they've never tried to set a boundary. And I think where the therapy comes in, the therapeutic piece of it comes in, is saying, okay, this is where we're beginning in therapy. And this is where not setting boundaries or setting too rigid of boundaries has gotten me into a place where I'm so disappointed that, I'm in therapy about this, to, hey, this is where I really want to be. I want to be this person who can say, yes, yes, I'm going to set that boundary, or no, I won't take that, or no, I won't have that in my life, or hey, I'm going to really advocate for my position on this one. And so what's in between where we start, and usually not setting boundaries, not only does it make complete chaos in our lives, it also makes us feel very depressed, very anxious, maybe both, not good enough, and really missing a sense of self that can lead to so many problems, addictions, and destructive behavior and very destructive relationships. If you don't have good boundaries, forget it. Your relationships are going to be a complete disaster. And so that's usually how I meet people I meet people through their problems. I'm a therapist. I don't meet people when things are going great. I meet people when their lives are, kind of in a period where they think things are falling apart. And then hopefully they leave with a sense of self-assurance and the ability to set boundaries, or at least, sort of entertain or sort of play around with setting different boundaries in their relationships. So let me give you some examples of, I think, very common boundaries, okay, that we all, and I see everyone's writing, I will totally get to that. Hi, Pat. So when we're talking about boundaries, a lot of times we're talking about the ability to say no. And when we say no, there's a lot implied in that for the self. What might be implied in saying no to people is, I'm disappointing you. You're not going to love me anymore. I'm going to lose the relationship, and I won't be able to handle that. You'll think less of me, or I will think less of me for not doing what you're asking me, or to be able to, people have so much on their plate in this day and age that, everybody's kind of, I think, in a little bit of a funk because, our phones are buzzing every 5 minutes. We have text messages and emails and phone calls and social media. I mean, there's so many things flying at us all the time, aside from just our jobs and our families, that it's very overwhelming. And it's very hard to set boundaries in today's day and age, and the implications that we all experience, that we all go through when we're contemplating setting these boundaries, again, go through that cycle of, I'm going to disappoint this person, they're not going to love me, I'm going to lose them, or I'm not doing a good enough job. Those are the typical things that come from that are kind of happening when we're not setting boundaries, or when we're just starting to crawl when it comes to learning how to set boundaries. And so why I say self-confidence is really underneath all that is because if you don't value yourself and your needs, specifically your needs in a relationship or your needs in your own life, if you do not value that and you do not place a very high importance on that, equal to other people, or maybe even at times more so important than other people, then what happens is your life sort of starts to fall apart. And then when you start to rebuild that confidence, and you start to, whether it's reading or going to therapy, however you need to get yourself together, maybe a little bit of both, and you start bouncing these ideas and these relationships and these situations off of a professional, you can start to see more clearly where these boundaries need to be placed, where they need to be placed. So saying no, I find, is one of the hardest things to do. And there's a great article in Psychology Today. It was actually from last year or a year ago, but you could still get it online, where it talks about the power of saying no. And it's very difficult when you're a people pleaser, and it's very difficult when you're very empathic and empathetic towards others to say no, even when it's at your own, saying yes is at your own expense. But if you don't learn to say no, you're going to be a doormat, and you're going to have anxiety problems and depression problems, and your life is going to spin out of control. And I think all of us have been there in, one way or another. So a personal example I can give you, for example, about a month ago, I kind of got involved with an online lead service for therapy clients. And I never did something like this before. I never knew how it was going to play out. And I thought, it'd be a nice little, kick in business or whatever. And of course, my eyes were a little bit bigger than my stomach. And I went, I can see, 10 people a day, or I haven't done that since I, graduated. And I didn't want to say no to anybody. And, people call me in need and they need advice and they need help. And I didn't want to say no because I feel so, often obligated to be there for my clients. And even though I didn't really know these people and they were new, I still, I felt like, okay, I can help them. I can be there. So I made this crazy schedule for myself. And I literally had no life for about 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks. All I did was work at my computer, which I hate doing anyway. I'm not a desk person, but everything's virtual these days. So I was doing it and I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't, doing exercise, and I wasn't eating properly and sleeping. I wasn't doing anything that I normally do to keep myself in good shape mentally and physically to do the job that I do. And a lot of times people don't realize how much energy it takes to, be a therapist and one after the other all day long. And usually I have a pretty good pace and it works out fine. Well, the last 3 or 4 weeks, not so much. And why did it get crazy and why did it get chaotic? Because of me, because I did not set and stick to appropriate professional boundaries for myself, for the caseload that I can handle. And I know my limits and I know what I can and can't do. And I kind of went for it. I went too far into it and I wound up, just with my shoulder, threw my shoulder out and all these things, just because I wasn't taking care of myself and I overdid it on my caseload. And it's the same thing as anybody else, no matter what your work is. Whether you're a lawyer or an accountant, whether you're in sales or communications or advertising, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that you do, especially when you're in business for yourself, it's very hard to turn down business. And when you work for somebody else, conversely, it's very hard to think of disappointing your boss or disappointing your coworkers by saying, no, that's too much for me. I'm sorry, I can't do it. And how do we deliver that message? How do we even deliver that message? So I just went through, I can't even believe I did it, but I just had a really difficult, 3 or 4 weeks, simply because I didn't stick to my own boundaries and I didn't say, no, I'm sorry, I can't take any more clients. I hate doing that. I don't like doing that. I feel like I'm letting people down or I'm disappointing them. But it wound up being that I did it at my own expense. And I had to suffer a little bit for that. And, my relationship suffered. And because I was working from 9 in the morning till 9 at night with like no breaks, and it was insane. And I couldn't return phone calls because I was so exhausted. That's no way to live. And I know better, but even, professional therapists, sometimes we forget where the boundaries are. And so I had a good refresher course in my own life, and I said, you know what, this is Liz Live topic because this is a very difficult subject. And again, what's implied in setting those boundaries or not setting those boundaries is if I say no and I turn down cases, or I say no to a friend that, wants to, go out late, or somebody that wants to, do something with you, you don't have the energy. The implication is if I say no, then I'm disappointing people. If I say no, that means maybe I'm not good enough. If I say no, maybe they're going to hate me. If I say no, maybe they're not going to love me anymore. And again, if I say no, they may walk away from me. So all of those implications that we all go through in our professional lives, our personal lives, and then some, that's what's underneath it all. That's what's underneath it all. So we have to kind of check ourselves and say, okay, like, where are my expectations of self? Are they reasonable? Who am I trying to prove what to? And what is motivating me to continue to say yes and do something when it's hurting me, or it's killing me, or it's making me feel uncomfortable? So that's the beginning of how we sort of understand boundaries. Saying no is not the only way to set a boundary and is not the only boundary, but it's a good example that I think many of us in today's world we face that. I think another place where we all fail so often is in our personal relationships. Where do those boundaries go? Because when it comes to professional life, it's a little bit more obvious. It's a little bit easier to see where we draw those lines. The relationship in professional life isn't necessarily based in emotion. It becomes emotional. We love the people we work with. We build relationships with them, but there's still a difference between business and personal. So I think professional boundaries a lot of times are easier to set than the ones in our personal relationships. Personal relationships exaggerate times 10 those feelings of inadequacy, that this person won't love me. It's a lot scarier to think of your spouse or your mother or your sister, your brother or your child not loving you than it is a coworker or a client or a boss, right? That becomes a whole nother ball game. And so we really, really, really suffer in that department, most of us. And again, I have found, and so has research, that men are much better at setting boundaries than women. And I could talk, a lot about why I think that is, but I'm not going to get too much into it, except that women are by nature people pleasers, nurturers, and so it's much more difficult, I think. Women are terrible at setting boundaries. Men are much better at it. You guys are much better. You kind of understand more so that, certain things are your responsibility and certain things are not, and you can say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that, much better than we can. And again, I don't exactly know why, but my sort of, I don't say my conjecture, but my hypothesis is that women are by nature nurturers, and we want to take care of and please. And if we're not nurturing or we're not caretaking, then are we really a good woman? We have that kind of feeling, and that doesn't necessarily exist for men as much. It does in a way of providing and protecting, but not so much with nurturing. So how do we set those boundaries in our professional relationships? How do we do that? Very, very difficult, and very difficult in new romantic relationships to set those boundaries, because if we meet someone that we really like, we want to stick with them. We don't want to lose them. So, well, if I say no, or I say this, or I say that, maybe they're not going to ask me on another date, or maybe I won't ever see them again. And so, once again, with personal boundaries, where is your sense of self-worth? Where is it? And where does it rank in comparison to other people? And this is very important to evaluate when you're looking at boundaries. Because again, most of us will say, well, my children are more important. My parents are more important. My wife is the most important, or my husband, or whatever. However whatever your belief system may or may not be. It's very challenging when there's an emotional component to relationships to be able to set those boundaries. And a lot of times we need to say to our partners, I need more help. You're not giving me enough help. Or I don't like the manner in which you're speaking to me. Or I don't like, this or that because it's making me uncomfortable. And the risk of setting boundaries in personal relationships, again, with whomever, brother, sister, mother, parent, grandparent, spouse, comes with very high emotional stakes. And so a lot of times we will avoid doing it until the problem becomes so huge that we wind up in a therapist's office asking them, why am I so anxious and why am I so depressed? And the therapist will tell you, well, where are your boundaries? Where are your personal boundaries? A good indicator that your boundaries are not set appropriately in your life, I think, a good indicator of that is when you start to feel overwhelmed, drained, walked on hurt continuously and consistently. Once in a while, listen, any relationship, you're going to get hurt. It's just the way it goes. And negotiating boundaries within relationships is a whole nother topic for another night, and is definitely something that you need professional guidance on, because it's very difficult. So as far as negotiating boundaries, we're going to put that maybe for next show. But for setting your own personal boundaries, again, when you're feeling like everything that's happening, every time you say yes and every time you're just sort of going along to get along, you're hurting yourself, or you're somehow at the, I don't know how to say this, but like not the butt of the joke, but you're kind of like always getting the short end of the stick, and it's happening over and over again, and you're drained and you're exhausted and you're hurt over and over and over again, consistently and continuously. Somebody's not putting up boundaries. Somebody is not advocating for themselves, and that's quite all right. I mean, no judgment. But when that happens, you need to take a look in the mirror and say, okay, what is it that I want to say to these people or this person that I'm not saying? What are the boundaries that I would like to set in this relationship? And what is holding me back from setting those boundaries? And again, I really believe that a lot of it comes down to valuing ourselves and our self-confidence. And when that is in the toilet, or that is low, and it's something that we really don't, possess, or we really don't understand, or we've never really established, then we know, this is going to be a rough road. Because if you don't have a little bit of confidence and you don't have value, you don't see value in yourself and your own feelings and your own situation, setting boundaries is going to be impossible. And, many of us have to be, pushed off a cliff, not literally, but emotionally speaking, to finally say, well, shit. What am I mean, I've had enough of this, right? And it will be different for everyone, because everyone's got a different tolerance of pain, and everybody's boundaries look different. So there isn't one blanket way that I can tell the world, hey, this is how you do it. These are the boundaries you should have in your life. Now go ahead and just do it. It doesn't work like that. Each case is different and requires a different, set of boundaries. And again, boundaries are fluid. They're going to move and they're going to change. So for example, let's say, God forbid your spouse is ill, like very ill, and they need a lot of caretaking. Even if it's at your own expense, and even if it wears you out and it trains you, most of us are going to go ahead and do that, because that deep love and that deep, sense of emotional responsibility that we have, hopefully, for our love interests, our partners, is going to, motivate us to want to caretake. And I see nothing wrong with that. And I think that there will always be times when, we'll move our boundaries, we'll loosen up our boundaries a little bit because of some dire circumstances. If, let's say, your friend finds out that, her husband had an affair, and it's 3:00 in the morning, and she calls you and she really needs someone to talk to, I'm going to pick up the phone for that person, even though I might have to get up really early for work, or even though I don't feel well, because that's an exceptional situation. And so that's something that, personally I would do for someone, and probably a lot of us would. But can you do it every night for everybody? Heck no. But there are people who will do that. And we have to, again, wonder, what are we trying to prove, or what are we trying to say to ourselves about ourselves, if we're constantly, crossing our own boundaries just so that we'll get love, just so that we'll be loved, or that we won't lose the love of somebody else. And, this can get really complex and really deep when we're talking about relationships that are abusive, or when we're talking about relationships where there's addiction or domestic violence. When we're talking about those type of things, those generally happen to people who have a complete inability to set boundaries, a complete inability as far as abusive relationships go. And with addiction, it's kind of a different story, but addicts will notoriously violate the boundaries of those people that they're close to in relationships, especially if they're high or they're drunk all the time or something. So you can bet that if there's an addict in your life, you're going to need some extra tough, rigid boundaries, because that's what addicts do when they're using. They will cross every boundary. They will do whatever it is to get their addiction need met. But if we're just speaking in terms of our general relationships, this is sort of, what we're looking at. Now, if we look at relationships, boundaries with the self, and then I promise I'm going to get to, people's questions or comments or whatever's up there. I can't see without my glasses. So when we're talking about the self, boundaries with self, that seems kind of, a strange concept. How do you set boundaries with yourself? So an example that I, might use is, let's say, we have teenage children and we want to teach our teenagers not to use drugs, for example. So we would then be teaching our children to have personal boundaries with themselves, that they will not use drugs or experiment with drugs because they won't go there, because they understand that that could lead somewhere really bad. Or they won't pick up cigarettes and start smoking because they know cigarettes are very bad for you and can cause a lot of disease and cancers and so on and so forth. But that is something other people really can't control, and those are boundaries that you have to set for yourself. For myself, I would never use certain drugs, right? Because it was a boundary I had for myself, whether it was self-taught, whether my family, I don't know where it came from. People have different boundaries themselves with money, with drugs, with sex, with food, with work. And boundaries with the self, they sound sort of similar with other people as boundaries with other people, but they're not, because they're more of a promise that we make to ourselves about our own behavior, not so much about how we're going to handle other people's behaviors as it relates to us. So boundaries with the self can be something like, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I shut my phone off every night at 9 o'clock because I need sleep and unwinding time. So when 9 o'clock comes around, my phone goes off. That's a boundary. That's a decision you make for yourself to protect your well-being. You might make a boundary with yourself. I'm not going to bring ice cream into my house. And this is like a little one, but I'm not going to bring ice cream into my home because I know if it's there, I'm going to eat it. So I'm going to make a commitment to myself not to bring junk food in my home, right? Those are things that you decide for yourself, that you draw the line. It's a commitment, it's a promise, it's a boundary with the self. Another example would be, oftentimes when people are getting out of marriages, they're going through divorce, or they're getting out of a bad relationship, sometimes people will set a boundary with themselves and say, okay, I'm not going to date for 3 months or 4 months because I need some time to heal and get my bearings, or maybe I want to go to therapy and process the relationship and make sure I don't make the same mistakes and blah, blah, blah. So I'm setting a boundary for myself that I'm not going to date for X amount of months, or I'm never going to go out with somebody who has 3 dogs because it's too much for me. Okay, so those are boundaries that, again, we set for ourselves. So again, there's the boundaries that we set with others, and there's the boundaries that we set with ourselves. They're similar. They kind of cross over a little bit. They kind of intersect because it's all about you at the end of the day and what makes you feel loved and valued and important and confident. But there is a little bit of a difference between making a deal with yourself and then making deals with other people about what you want and what you don't want in your life, and really seeing that through. Really seeing that through. So largely, I think boundaries are things that are spoken to people in your relationships, but they can also be things that are shown. For example, we all have, the person who, calls us 1,000 times in a row when, we're trying to get something done or we're having dinner with our families, and we won't answer it. And we won't answer it over and over and over again, maybe for several days, to teach that person that, if you call me like a maniac every night, I'm not going to answer the phone. So don't do it, right? So sometimes just by not doing something or not playing into something or ignoring, text messages from people that are rude or, consistently, invasive, we might just not do something, which is doing something, and that is showing somebody a boundary rather than speaking up and saying it. And I think all of the ways that we set boundaries are very powerful, and it just depends on the situation and what feels the best for you. So, okay, time to put the glasses on and see what people are saying on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Okay. Anniversary follower. I don't know what that means, but Amy, you're an anniversary follower. I had no idea what that means, but that's really cool. Okay. So, my dog is not a golden doodle. No, I actually have 3 little ones running around. 2 are mine, and one of them I'm dog sitting for a friend of mine, and I think that's the one. He, I think, is a Yorkie Poodle mix. I don't know what that's called. The Porky? I don't know what that's called, but that's what he's, a poodle and Yorkie mix, I believe. Hello, Catherine. Always has great wisdom to share. Respect yourself enough to set boundaries. If others don't respect you and your boundaries, then they aren't your people. You probably are better off without them. And yes, oftentimes when we're trying to set boundaries with other people, and we've tried a couple times and they're not getting the message, or we just seem to be getting continuously hurt over and over and over again, then sometimes, unfortunately, the final the final boundary is cutting off people. And we've done shows on that. Like, when is it time? How do we know? What if it's family? My gosh, I mean, you could go back in my archives on Facebook or YouTube, and my gosh, I mean, I talk about that all the time. And Catherine's right. Sometimes it does get there. We hope it doesn't, but sometimes, it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. Some people are just, impossible. Hello, Patricia, and she's a top fan. This is so excited. I didn't know these things could be. Catherine, okay, you can't be everything for everyone. Setting boundaries is a must. It does get easier to do. And that's true. That's a good point. For those beginners out there who, have really never set boundaries, it's very difficult in the beginning. And again, it's not something that, one day you just become like a great boundary setter. It is something that it just accrues over time, and you learn over time how to do it as you build more confidence and you learn about yourself more and more, and what you are and are not okay with, and what you can live with and what you can't. And when you start to really love the person that you are, and you appreciate your own character, then you're going to be less inclined to put up with shit, basically. And, I love when I talk to, young people like in their 20s and they don't even know what a boundary is. They've never even heard of such a thing. And so it's kind of fun teaching people And, it's something that we work on our whole lives. It's just something you always have to sort of be conscious of if you want to have a non-chaotic life or a quasi non-chaotic life, because there's always some chaos, but we do the best we can. And it's funny you say you can't be everything to everyone. One of my friends said that to me about 15 years ago. A friend of mine that we used to go to the same gym, and we were just having a casual conversation, and she said that to me, and it's a simple statement, but it stuck with me. And it's true. We want to make everybody happy. We want to please everybody. We want to have a harmonious life with all the people in our lives, but that's a bit of a fantasy. Some people are really blessed with families that just get it and just get along and it just works. I think those people are fewer and further between. And some people will just hit it in their romantic relationships and it just works. And they don't have to focus that much on boundaries. But again, I think those are, less likely the norm. And mostly all of us have to work on it forever. And we can't be everything to everyone. And we have to be okay with that. Another great line that one of my professors gave me once was, you don't have to be liked to be useful. And he was talking in terms of being a therapist, that sometimes, we have to deliver some tough news or some hard realities to our clients. And they're not going to like us for it. But we do it because we feel that, or I do it anyway. I think most therapists, I know I do it because I feel like it's ethically the right thing to do. To be honest and to be truthful in a certain situation, it's not always pleasant to hear. And they might not like me for it. And that's something I've had to get used to. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too much to me, but it's happened. And it hurts me just as much as it hurts the client. But if I know I'm doing it because of good ethics and integrity, then I'm able to say, okay, I was doing it with the right reasons, and it doesn't always get delivered. But if it's useful and it helps them, then it's okay. Tough love sometimes. So I've set a boundary. Catherine says, don't settle for less than I deserve. It brings it back to self-respect above all else at this point in my life at 53. And well said. It really does come down to that. It really does come down to self-respect. And I think, too, that all of us, on some level, we have to know that we have permission not to be everything to everybody, and that we'll still be lovable. And that sometimes we just can't do it all, and we have to say no in order to save ourselves. And it just has to be in order to survive. And to survive and thrive, we have to disappoint some people sometimes, and we have to say no. And we have to be able to live with that. And I think if we do have, if we really do value ourselves, which not everybody does, and not everybody does in all categories or under all circumstances, but as we get older, as Catherine's saying, it definitely gets easier, I think. At least it has for me. But I think that as we learn that we do have value in the world, and that we do things with integrity, and we are thoughtful, but we can't be everything to everybody all the time, then it gets a little easier to say no or to put down that boundary. And I think that once we do that and it works out okay, then that gives us the confidence to do it again. And whether it's walking away from a situation that is hurting you, or advocating for yourself in a relationship that's, hurting you or crossing your boundaries, once you flex those boundary muscles a little bit, the next time gets easier and easier. And again, Catherine's point, by the time you're 53, 45, whatever, it gets easier, and you have it's not as scary. But I think people in their 20s and 30s, it's very frightening to set boundaries. And I think that probably it's not always an age thing. It just depends on the closeness of the relationship that we're trying to set boundaries within, or what's on the line. What's on the line if we set this boundary? Is it our job? Is it our marriage? Is it our, special relationships? But at the end of the day, it does have to be also about us, and that we can all see ourselves not necessarily as more or less important than others, but just as important. So if we're all on an equal playing field, and we see ourselves on that equal playing field with the people that we love, then setting boundaries gets sort of easier and easier, if that makes sense. So confidence is key. Yes, it certainly is. So just to sort of wrap this whole show in a little bit of a bow, and if you came in late, it's going to be on Facebook, it's going to be on Instagram, and I'll be putting it up on YouTube tonight or tomorrow. Go over it a couple times, because I went from the very basics of, I call it Boundaries 101. What the heck's a boundary? I talk about the definition of a boundary and why they're important, and the different kinds of boundaries of with self and boundaries with others, and what it takes to sort of get the courage to be able to start setting boundaries in your life, no matter the situation. And I do think this is some place, an area where everybody struggles. I don't care how old you are, or what profession you're in, or what the situation is. Setting boundaries is not easy. And a lot of times we need help learning how to do it, kind of figuring out or choosing what boundaries we actually want to set and with who. And that's where I think therapy can come into the picture, to really help you explore all of that and organize it in a way that feels good and feels authentic to you. And then once you get those skills, then you can sort of spread your wings and fly. But just know that you're going to have some years where you're just firing all cylinders and you're a great boundary setter, and then boom, a new relationship or a new situation is going to come in. It's going to challenge you. And that's the way life goes, guys. And that's why I have a job, and that's why you guys are watching these. So what a fun show. Thank you, Catherine. I love having you. You always add so much to the show. Thank you. So please share these videos with your friends and your family and your Facebook friends and your YouTube friends and your Instagram followers. And subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/The Elizabeth126, and Eliz Therapist on Instagram. So I hope to see you guys back here Saturday morning at 11 a.m. So again, sorry about last night, but I couldn't do it. Because I didn't set the right boundaries in my profession the last month. Shame on me, but it's okay. I've got myself back together. And so anyway, I will see you guys. I'll see you guys on Saturday morning for Liz Live, 11 a.m. And that's it.